Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Hanwei Qi Jian, I think is how you pronounce it. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But more or less, this is not an original Hanwei Qi Jian. It is a revised second-hand amalgamation with a European-style grip and wrap on it. But it's still pretty cool. It's still a special sword. And so I thought I would talk about some of the features of this sword because I thought it was really stupid, frankly, when I saw it. When I saw this sword online in the catalog, I always thought that it was kind of a dumb, hokey thing, and I never got why it was really expensive until I happened to get one. And I got it somewhat accidentally. I was haggling over a lot of swords, and this one came in at a price that I was like, all right, I guess fine. And it allowed me and the seller to come to an agreement on a pile of swords that were for sale. But honestly, this was not the one that I was particularly excited about, but I've had other Hanwei Jian before, and they were not bad. This one, I recall being a expensive thing when it came out. It used to have, or the original version had, Samegawa wrap or ray skin wrap on the handle, as well as on this kind of initial section where you might hang on to the sword. So I recall it being around $800 or $1,000 or something like that, and at the time, I recall seeing that it was, made out of one piece of steel, one billet of steel, drop forged, in the sense that the blade and the handle are made out of like one piece. Typically, the blade of the sword would run down and have a tang that is somehow affixed inside the handle, and the hilt furniture and all that stuff would be made of separate components. And that's not the case here. The blade and the hilt are one piece. There's a little bit of wood here in the grip. This kind of center section is hollowed out, so it's not one piece of steel to likely reduce weight, but it's still hefty, and you certainly feel that weight down here. Anyway, I thought that was dumb, but my previous experience in like drop forged or single piece forged swords was really from a cold steel knife that is nearly the dumbest knife that I've ever had, because I live in a place that's winter 10 months out of the year, and if I try to grab it with an anywhere near wet hand, it freezes to my hand. I guess it helps in retention, but not so great in just about every other respect. So I don't generally like drop forged things. They're usually unnecessarily heavy, and I just haven't personally had a lot of experience in swords that I liked that were made with that style technique. And that's why I wasn't excited about this one. I saw that it was expensive and had a construction method that I thought was previously the stupid. And this is anything but. When I got it and held it in my hand, immediately there's this kind of sense of magic that you have. There's like, oh, wait a minute. I need to rethink how I think about this technique, because this feels really good. And I kind of regret not pursuing them when I had the option to, because there's been many secondhand deals that I've never really invested much time in or pursued because I thought this sword was stupid. Anyway, so I got this one, but it was in a state of disrepair. It was missing the Samegawa pieces. It had the original kind of exposed handle underneath, which was basically just metal, and the wood filler that was in here. It does look as well a little different, like the patina on the fittings has aged differently, I suppose. I'm not sure. The ones in the photos that I see tend to be a little bit more richer black patina or forge scale maybe. I'm not sure what exactly it is. Anyway, I was in the process of cleaning this handle up and thinking about what the hell I was going to do with it. I don't know, hockey tape or some sort of thing. And a sword friend, Matt, happened to be watching the live stream that I, for some reason, was doing this on, and said he would be able to remedy the issue for $150. And that made me think, what am I doing trying to clean it up anymore? So I sent it off to Sword for Matt. I'll link his YouTube channel, incidentally, in the description down below. I'd encourage you to check it out. He's a very proficient cutter and also not too shabby at wrapping handles and stuff. So if he offers his services more publicly, well, if this is any indication of the work that he's capable of, then I would say he gets a thumbs up from me. In retrospect, I do wish I spent maybe a little bit more time refining the surface. I can make out some of the character underneath the wood here. That's a result of kind of where it was tied down. If I had spent a little bit more time cleaning up the wood and maybe refining the shape a little bit, it would have given Matt something better to wrap and clean up here. As it is, though, this has a European-style grip on it now, and frankly, I really like it. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment, though. But that is not original to the sword. Sword from Matt did that, and it is fantastic. Anyway, as I often do, I will talk about the bits and bobs and fits and features. I'm not going to push this sword very much, though. I don't know how to use Chinese Jian. I don't study that style of swordsmanship. This one as well, when I was playing with it and cutting with it, it wasn't particularly sharp. And it still, Sword for Matt did some level of sharpening on it, but it still could be a little bit sharper. I think he didn't want to mar up the blade too much in sharpening it. So if I wanted to, I could try and profile it a little better. At the moment, though, it's sufficiently sharp to have fun with, but I'm not going to bash it into rocks and stuff like I typically do. Anyway, if I start at the end here, you can kind of see this very crude looking, what almost looks like stamped. I don't know if it's a face of some kind, but I don't know exactly what it's supposed to be. It's like a guardian face or something. And there also appears to be like a spot of glue or something here where it makes me think there would have been a ring or a tassel or something drilled out here. And it doesn't appear to be on any of the examples that I've seen, but it almost looks like there's some schmutz in there that might be at some point able to be drilled out and have a ring so you can attach a tassel or some sort of thing like that. Anyway, mine doesn't have it, and I haven't pursued clearing it out. I don't know if it comes out or not. It has this patina on it, which appears natural. I think it might be forged scale, but I'm not entirely sure. In any case, it hasn't diminished despite being dropped, thrown around, left outside, not really cleaned up very much. It's all held up pretty well, and I like it. None of the edges on here are bitey or rough. At the same time, they're not particularly detailed and show some tool markings and stuff. I can kind of make out some spots where a grinder might have been used. I can kind of make out some spots where it looks like it was probably stamped in because they're a little off kilter a bit. So if it were carved in or something like that, I think it would likely be more even. Anyway, it has a little bit of character. It doesn't have as much character on the sides, though. I'm guessing this was cut out and they had some sort of press or stamp or something like that they used to get this face piece in here. I like that it has a slight little ring around it, though, and it makes for a very natural transition to the grip. Now, I don't know exactly what the original grip looked like because I never got to see it, but on the original photos, it looks pretty clean. It butts up amazingly well, though, with this European-style grip or this leather wrap. I call it a European-style grip. I'm sure in China they also used leather grips at some point, but I know this kind of leather-wrapped, dyed cord around and affixed in place with glue, mostly on European swords. And how it butts up, though, is absolutely fantastic. And I love that it's red as well. Now, Swordfriend Matt said I can dye it any color. He said I can avoid dyeing it, and he sent me some photos of it before it was done. And I said, pick. Do whatever you think looks right. He chose red, and couldn't be happier. It blends with the sword so well, and it has this, I don't know, there's a little bit of variation. There's some darker spots than others, but for the most part, it has an amazing look, and it blends with this sword, and it feels like a lucky color for this sword. Anyway, the way that the leather shows up with this little pommel area fitting right here, I think is spot on. There's no hot spots, and it looks so clean and so nice, and it blends in like it was meant to be. The shape of the handle as well, if I move up to the grip, so there's metal underneath it, and then there's some wood core filler in here. That's what I got to see when the sword was sent to me before this handle was put on. I was trying to file the area here. There was still some adhesive left on the sword from the Samegawa that was wrapped around it. I don't know how much of that was left on, I should say. But I'd venture, I guess, that Swordfriend Matt cleaned it up because I don't see any bumps or anything like that. What I see is, some indication of where the metal and the core wood was, and then some indications of where that wood was scarred and things like that. So if I had spent a lot of time kind of refining the shape and smoothing it out, it could have been a better base, and some of those little indications or flaws wouldn't be there. But there's a lot of flaws on the sword. The blade has issues. The scabbard's got pings and dings. All the pieces are here, but all of them are in a state of disrepair. So if this were an immaculate, perfect handle, I think it might not actually blend as well. As it is, I think it stands out and looks stunning, but I think these little bits give character. Anyway, food for thought. If I had spent more time figuring out the base, it would have given Matt something better to work with. As it is, though, the handle itself, shape-wise, is a little bit round. I don't really have a problem indexing it. It moves in my hand pretty well. I didn't have a problem keeping it in one spot, but if I try to turn it, it'll move around in my hand, and so it's not particularly secure. So that's, I suppose, something to keep in mind. In the event that this had Samegawa on it, that stuff in swords that I've had with bare Samegawa grips tends to act like very low grit sandpaper, and it secures to your hand immediately and does not turn. It doesn't matter if it's a dowel and a perfectly round surface that's completely wet in your hand. It will grip and your skin will come off before it will move. So it tends to bite in quite a bit. This rounded handle doesn't do the same thing. I can turn it around in my hand, so the Samigawa type substance that was used here may have been a little bit more intentional, given that it doesn't have a shape that lends itself to kind of locking into your hand. As it is, I can tell where it's flat, I can tell where the edge is, but it is a little bit on the round side. I can also get two hands on here, incidentally, and there's not really an uncomfortable spot to grip the sword, which is kind of interesting. If I hold down here, these little slots naturally let my fingers hold in, so if I kind of hold it in a handshake grip down at the pommel, I can hold it very comfortably in the middle, which is typically where my hand rests. I can choke up right on the guard if I want. It gives me a sense of tip control because I don't know, more contact with the surface of my hand, and I can grip it with two hands down here if I want to. It offers some variety in the grip, and the only complaint that I'd have would be that it doesn't necessarily index particularly well. I can't really know exactly where the edge is, but I have a good enough general idea. But if you're trying to do pool noodle cuts and, you know, get very, very even, clean 45-degree angles, it really helps to have that edge index extremely well. I don't feel that on this one. That's not a critique of Swordford Matt's work at all. That's more or less how this handle was geared. But with some training and with the original grip, I'd imagine you'll get a feel for it, and then your hand will stay pretty much locked in. The transitions that Matt did on here are also just great. They line up super well and fit with this style and fitting, I think, really, really quite well. There's nothing that I'd bitch and moan about. Now, Swordford Matt was watching the video while I was modifying this and probably has seen me bitch and moan about such things. So I don't know if that's extra attention because he figured I'd complain about it, or if that's just the way he does things. But I've seen some of his other work online, and I think he's just meticulous that way. The seam here, I can make it out, but I can't get a fingernail on it. It looks clean and well done. Anyway, just very, very handsome grip. There's a crossguard that lines up here, and it is this swelly clam bit, and it's actually kind of fun to hold right up on the crossguard, despite my sausage flub hands kind of leaning over it. I do think anyway, it's a handsome crossguard in my mind. Very simple. You can tell that it's kind of been beat on. It has a nice patina to it, but anyway, I happen to like it. And then it runs up to this ricasso kind of habaki blade collar area, but obviously it's not a collar because it's just integrated into the grip. It also has kind of a lion's face or something like that on it. I think that's what I'm looking at, would be some sort of lion, because there's little whiskers and things on there. Anyway, it offers some retention when it goes in the scabbard, so that if I turn it upside down, it has a similar purpose, I suppose, to the Japanese style habaki that I'm a little bit more familiar with, because it offers some friction fit on the guard area down, or where that blade collar is, where it meets the scabbard, offers some sort of friction fit, and it has a very similar function to the habaki on a Japanese sword. It's a little bit more aesthetically interesting, and it's also integrated, so there's no holes or any space for water or anything like that to get. How it lines up, as well as I can make out kind of the finishing, how they had to polish the sword. There's a little bit of attention that's been put there. A little hard to clean it up and make it seamless from a polish standpoint, run down the rest of the blade. That could be the after effect of, you know, years of secondhand usage, not sure. But anyway, the overall hilt construction, I think, is actually kind of handsome in person. Admittedly, I thought the sword was stupid when I saw it the first time, and I thought, well, that's really expensive and pretty crude looking. Up close, I think it actually has some charm, and the rest of the fittings on the scabbard kind of flow in the same theme. They're a little, I think these are cast, and they're obviously quite a bit more elaborate than the kind of faces on the other fittings, but they have also charm, and the patina isn't too different in terms of how it looks from the forged scale bits, or at least what I suspect is forged scale on the other pieces. They're kind of a darker black, and I'm not sure if they're steel or bronze or what the fittings are. Anyway, I can make out some faces on here. There's these little hoops that presumably will allow you to affix the sword to something. When I got it, there was nothing on here, but the original had Samigawa, or this kind of ray skin substance, and it was wrapped as well. This fitting was loose and has been secured by Swordford Matt. Everything is right and tight, and it grips really easy here. It feels good. It looks good. This part of the sword is just, it's a very handsome looking thing, and where Swordford Matt wrapped it is really, really nice. It almost makes me wonder what it would be like to have him wrap some of this stuff on like a pole arm or something like that, because this leather is going to keep things tight from splitting and whatnot. It keeps these fittings in place, or at least however he did it, they seem secured on there. And it's very comfortable on the hand, so it makes me kind of want to put it on like a naginata or a bow or something like that. Anyway, the rest of the fittings all have some charm. There's this very large end cap right here. It has a little bit of bits poking out, which I assume are original and could theoretically catch on something. I don't know how historic it is or isn't, but it does have some charm to it. This one has been pinged and dinged, so it's got some scars from old wounds, and it's even splitting a little bit in some spots, but it still is going to hold together with these fittings. It has a bit of charm. Now the blade is, well, it's pretty. It's just a mono steel blade. It's not folded, or it doesn't have any other characteristics in the steel other than it being made from one piece, but there's no grain structures to observe. It's just a polished piece, and the one that I got was a little worse for wear. It had some scars and pitting and some sanding done to it already. But there are some neat characteristics of the blade. One, it's really quite thick here, and it tapers down a little bit. It has some distal taper, but it remains a relatively thick sword throughout. In comparison to many of the other Tai Qi Jian that I've played with from Hanwei that are thin and almost whippy, this one is very robust and very thick. It has a fuller that runs, roughly 4/5 the length of the blade, and it's pretty thick and not sharpened. I would say, maybe about 6 inches up the blade. This portion of the blade is dull. And so I imagine if you're using it to block, you have a lot of meat here to absorb shock. The rest of the blade is sharpened. That's common on Japanese style swords where it's not particularly sharp. It leaves a lot of room to polish and change the shape of the blade, and for the blade to diminish over time, and for you to continue to be able to preserve some non-secondary beveled edges. There's plenty of room left on the blade to age. I don't know if that's why they do it, because it's not, well, I don't know. Anyway, it's not sharp for about 6 inches. Sword from Matt has sharpened it a little bit, and it's not something I'd want to get whacked with, but not ludicrously sharp, except for kind of where you get out to the tip up here. And there's one other interesting facet of the blade, and that is that it rings. I don't know if I can get something a little bit harder, my ring here. It has a delightful sound to it that rings, and it's tight throughout. And Swordfriend Kane actually posted something on Facebook, a story about a Qi Jian, I think, and a one-piece construction of a sword that rings, and it was a wonderful story, and I'll try to link it in the Facebook description down below so you can check it out. I don't know the history of it, but I thought it was really cool. He said it was related to this sword, and the ring is interesting. I'll save the read for you, but I thought it was a compelling and fun story about a sword that rang and how it played into the tale. Anyway, this one is not the best example of the original, but it is showing what Hanwei can do. There's little bits of surface ripple, which is common for Hanwei and their Japanese style swords, but all of it is straight, and I imagine it's got to be a real pain in the ass to make a blade and then also like forge the handle on in one go. And they did a really good job, dynamically speaking as well. This is just different in the hand. It feels, it brings naturally the point of balance because this whole handle is mostly metal except for a little bit of a wood core. And it brings the point of balance quite a bit further down. So I certainly feel like I'm in touch with this zone of the sword. It diminishes the point control a little bit. Like I feel like I'm very easy to deliver like wrist cuts and manipulate the weight of the blade and bring either edge where I want it to go. But I feel very connected more or less to this section of the blade. And I feel like I could deliver cuts effectively with force very quickly because I can just move this section of the blade around so easily. It manipulates and gets where it's supposed to go despite being relatively heavy for a sword of this size. At the same time, I don't feel very connected to the tip. So getting the tip where I want would take a little bit more practice. It's not impossible to do, but at the same time, I definitely don't feel like I could trim your eyelashes with it confidently. I do feel like despite its kind of, subtle size, that I could take some sword blows and deflect them and actually hold you off because it's a pretty robust and rigid sword. And if I do deliver a thrust, it's very rigid. It doesn't flex much at all, and it would penetrate quite well. But at the same time, in the cut, it's not going to cleave a man in two, but it could certainly cut you enough to get you dead. And it has enough mass to do that. And I think with some of the motions that I've seen in Chinese martial arts, I can kind of see how how that would work. There's a lot of kind of quick wrist cuts, and this blade in particular allows you to deliver those with a surprising amount of force. I'm not experienced at doing those kinds of things. Most of the experience I have with swordsmanship is with two hands, but with this I feel like I can very quickly, with some minor manipulation of my wrist, get the mass of this blade and the tip moving where I want it to go and deliver a very effective cut. So I can see why this has some appeal, and it makes me think about swords a little bit differently, and I happen to really find this sword charming, even more so now that sword friend Matt has finished it up. Now, I've cut with it. Don't look at my cutting as an example of what the sword is capable of. I'm not particularly experienced with it. It was fun, but I also played with it outside in the cold. It's just a handsome sword. It's very fun feeling. I find it to be quite a looker, and I think it has some charm with this red European-y grip. The composition, I guess, or the material or how it's put on reminds me a lot of European swords, but the color being red, how it ties in with this sword, I think it really mixes exceptionally well, and it makes a sword that to me is very charming and is a keeper. I happen to really like this one. I hope what I've shared with you has, well, told you something interesting about it. Unfortunately, you can't go buy one yourself, but what you can do is keep your eye out on the secondhand market. Every now and again, some of these come up for sale, and if they do, hopefully you know that they're worth pursuing, or at least you've got more insight into if they are or aren't from a guy who doesn't practice with them perspective. I'm going to shut up now. Thanks for watching. Cheers.